Hello everyone, I pray you're all well. You're welcome to today's lecture on gender in agricultural development. I will start with an introduction, and we see that in reality women play a major role in agricultural value chains. For example, they play a role in production, they play a role in value addition or processing, and they also play a role in marketing, and finally in consumption of agricultural produce. But however, because of cultural attitudes and beliefs, we might be disadvantaged in some cases. For example, they might not be able to receive extension services, they might not be able to receive training on production of new crop varieties or technologies. They might also not be able to access and have control over land, or they might not be able to have access to inputs that are required in agricultural production. So when we are talking about gender, or when we are studying about gender, there are always two terms that are always interchangeably used, but they mean completely different things, and these terms are gender and sex. We will start by defining sex, and we see that sex refers to the biological difference between males and females. Sex refers to the biological characteristics that categorize someone as either female or male. So when you look at children, or when you look at people, you're able to know that this is a man, or this is male, this is female, just by looking at their biological makeup. You can look at their biological attributes, and you're able to differentiate them basing on that. Then gender, we see that gender is a social construct which refers to social attributes acquired during socialization. And because these attributes are learned behavior, they can change over time, and they can vary across cultures. So if you're in central Uganda, or if you're in western Uganda, or if you're in eastern Uganda or northern Uganda, gender actually differs. Okay, so we see by definition that gender refers to the socially constructed attributes, roles, activities, responsibilities, and needs associated to men and women in a given society at a given time. Remember, we've said that these actually differ depending on the society you're in, and they differ over time. Okay, so they will not stay the same. We see that what is believed to be a woman's role will vary according to the culture you're in, or according to the time when you're talking about that particular role or responsibility. So when we are talking about gender, we are talking about mainly roles and activities or responsibilities that are perceived to be either for men or women in that particular society or culture. Okay, so this is what we've been talking about. In some communities, women are actually supposed to do the house chores, they're supposed to cook, they're supposed to take care of the children, they're supposed to look for firewood, they're supposed to fetch water. So that is what gender is all about in that particular society. We also see societies where women are actually supposed to ride the bicycle so that they can bring firewood, so that they can bring water at home. But then there are also societies where women are actually not supposed to even sit on a bicycle. So gender differs, the roles of men and women differ depending on the culture where you are based. Okay, so now let's look at gender goals. So we see that any gender program will always have 3 goals, and one of them is gender equality. Okay, so gender equality looks at equal access to power, resources, and benefits for both men and women. Okay, so this does not mean that women and men should become the same. No. But this equality denotes that women have the same opportunities in their lives as men. Okay, and these also include the ability to participate in the public sphere. Okay, then 2, the other gender goal is gender equity. Okay, and this means that we give women a fair chance to make progress towards a position equal to men in the society. Okay, gender equity denotes the equivalence in life outcomes for men and women, recognizing their different needs and interests, and requiring a redistribution of power and resources. Okay, so gender equity is about fairness. There is fair access to inputs, there is fair access to land, there is fair access. So there is fairness vis-a-vis equality, where there is equal opportunities for all. Okay, for example, if we look at this picture, we are able to see that there was no fairness. Okay, for example, they are saying that for fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam, and they told them to climb a tree. But here we have a bird, we have a monkey, we have a penguin, we have an elephant, we have fish, we have a dolphin, and we have a dog. So sincerely speaking, there is no fairness at all in the kind of exam that these animals were given. Okay, so when we are talking about equity, we are talking about fairness for all. So this is a very good illustration that you'll always find talking about equality vis-a-vis equity. So we said in equality there is equal opportunity for all. So these people were given equal platforms to be able to view the match that was going on. Okay, but you see that there is no fairness in equality. Okay, but in equity, because one of them was much more shorter, so you give a higher platform to the one who is shorter than the rest, so that everyone is actually able to view the match. So that is equity, and that is fairness. Okay, the third gender role is women empowerment, and we see that to work together to transform gender relations in a society, we need strong and self-confident men and women. Okay, and we see that a bottom-up process of transferring and transforming gender power and relations through individuals or groups developing awareness of women's subordinations and building their capacity to challenge it. Okay, so in women's empowerment, we are ensuring that everyone is aware of the subordinations that are faced by women. Okay, and there's a general building of a capacity to challenge this subordination. Okay, so it's about ensuring that actually women are empowered, women are given more opportunities, and they are given encouragement to ensure that they are actually confident and they are able to face the challenges that are in the community, and they are able to actually solve them on their own. Okay, so now let's talk about gender relations. We see that the social relationship between men and women is what we call the gender relations. Okay, and these gender relations are concerned with how power is distributed between the two sexes. Okay, the men and the women. They create and reproduce systematic differences in men's and women's position in a given society. And then gender relations also define the ways in which responsibilities and claims are allocated and the way in which each are valued or of value. Okay. But then when we look at access to and control over resources, we see that there is a difference in the way that men and women access these particular resources, and these resources can be categorized as economic resources, for example household income. Then they can be productive resources, for example land, labor, equipment and tools, credit, or they can be political, for example the capability for leadership, access to information, and so on. And then they can also be in terms of time, okay, which is a very critical resource. So these are the types of resources, but we all see that men and women have different levels of access to these resources and control, and this definitely will affect production or affect the way someone benefits from a given activity. For example, we see that in some communities women might actually be involved in bringing income into the home, but they do not decide or they do not take part in deciding what this income is supposed to be used for. Okay. Then land, we also see that in some communities women can utilize land, they can have access to it, but they don't have control. They cannot decide what is done on this particular land. So all these issues have a lot to do or a lot to contribute to the overall objective of agriculture productivity. Okay, we see that access to resources implies that women and men are able to use and benefit from specific resources, which can be material, financial, human, social, political, and so on, like we've seen in the previous slide. And we see that access gives a person the opportunity to benefit from these resources. So if one particular group does not access or does not have the ability to use a given resource, then it means they will not be able to actually benefit. Then control over resources implies that both men and women can obtain access to the resource and also make decisions about what to use it for. And this is what we've been talking about. You can have access, yes, you're able to use, but you cannot decide what to actually use this land for. You cannot decide whether you're to grow maize or whether you're going to grow tea, which is a perennial crop. So such decisions are supposed to be shared. Okay, and here we give an example that women can access land, meaning that they can use it, or women can own land, meaning that they can be legal owners with land titles or holders with titles, and therefore they can make decisions about whether to sell, whether to rent the land, or even decide what to grow, whether to grow an annual crop or a perennial crop, or whether to grow vegetables. Okay, so access and control should actually go hand in hand. Okay, now let's look at division of labor in agriculture and rural livelihoods. Okay, Let's start by looking at the categories of activities that are in agriculture. One, we have production activities. Okay, so for any agriculture based household, they are what we call production activities, and these are activities that focus on producing goods, often for sale or for wage or income. Okay, so men's productive work commonly takes place outside the household, and they are more commonly the activities that generate monetary income. Okay, so depending on whether you're a woman or a man, the social or the cultural perception of what a productive activity is for you differs. Because here we see that for women, productive work commonly occurs within the household and is generally less valued and often not even taken into account. Okay, so the work that people do, which is for producing monetary value or income, is different. Men are known to go outside the house or the household or the home. They go and do work wherever they go and bring money. But women are actually perceived to be doing work within the homestead. Whether it brings income or not, it's actually less valued. But you might find even instances where the women do work within the home, but it actually brings in more income. And then we also have what we call reproduction activities, and these are activities related to having children and those that contribute to their family's growth and survival. And these include building houses or fences, raising and feeding children, managing vegetable gardens for home consumption, cooking, cleaning, and so on. So it's commonly assumed to be the responsibility of women to undertake reproduction activities. Okay, but we also see that men also often perform reproductive work. For example, taking care of machines or washing their cars. So these are activities that are within the household, and they are related to ensuring that the home is actually okay. Everyone at home is growing well, surviving, feeding well, they are healthy. But depending on the community where you are, this is actually perceived to be more of a woman's role. Okay, and it does not generate any income. Okay, but it can actually affect the well-being of the entire household. And then we have community activities, and these are activities that most often take place in public or at meetings, and may involve being publicly active, well known, or taking leadership roles, or simply being respected in the community. We see that community work relates to work and time devoted to the political, religious, or social work in organizations or in the community. And we also see that commonly men's engagements in community work are more valued than women's engagements. So when we look at probably groups in the community, or when we go to churches and mosques, the activities that people do in those places are what we call community activities. For example, taking leadership roles. There are even places where women are not expected to become leaders, or we find places where women are actually expected to be people in charge of money or treasurers, because they are probably expected to be better caretakers of funds. So it depends actually on the community where you are. So now let's look at gender mainstreaming. Gender mainstreaming has been embraced internationally as a strategy towards realizing gender equality. And remember, we talked about gender equality as having equal opportunities for both men and women. Gender mainstreaming involves the integration of a gender perspective into the preparation, design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of policies and programs or projects with a view to promote equality between men and women. So in every aspect of a given project or activity, there is actually a gender perspective, okay? And the ultimate goal of mainstreaming gender is to ensure that there is equality between men and women. Okay, so what are the principles of gender mainstreaming? One is gender sensitive language. We see that texts referring to or addressing both men and women must make women and men equally visible. It also applies to forms, documents, telephone directories, texts on the intranet or the internet, advertising for events, posters, films. So whatever the source of communication or the media of communication that you choose to use in that particular project, there should be equality in visibility of both men or for both men and women. And we see that attention must also be paid to a gender sensitive choice of image or images when preparing public relations materials. So in every aspect of communication, one should ensure that there is sensitivity to gender. The second principle is gender specific data collection and analysis. And here we see that data must be collected, analyzed, and presented by a gender perspective. We see that social dimensions like age, ethnicity, income, and level of education should also be reflected where possible. So whenever you're collecting data in a given project, you should ensure that all these issues come out. When you're collecting data, you're supposed to know how, probably how many males, how many females, or how many males, how many females that we have. And in every perspective, it's income. We would want to know how much income the women bring in, how much income the men bring in. But we are also saying that we should also look at other social dimensions like age, ethnicity, income, level of education. So you've also seen those questionnaires of social research. There is that demographic data that is always collected, and it relates to age, it relates to gender, it relates to ethnicity, education, income. It can also relate even to religion. Okay, and we see that gender specific analysis of the initial situation must provide the basis for all decisions. And that is why it is very important to have a perspective of both men and women, because when you're making decisions, you should ensure that these decisions actually ensure equality in benefits for both the male or the men and the women. The third principle is equal access to and utilization of services. We see that services and products must be assessed as to their different effects on men and women. And in this aspect, it is very important to identify who uses the services or products we are talking about. Is it men or women, or is it both? Then who the target groups are. We might also want to identify whether women and men have different needs. We might also need to identify which needs they are. Then we might also want to know whether there are different circumstances of men and women taken into account when planning and designing services, because we know that men and women have different roles, different needs, and therefore when planning we are supposed to ensure that we look at both circumstances of men and women. Okay, and so on. So we have to look at all those issues. Then principle number 4 is women and men are equally involved in decision making. So for any particular project or engagement in the community, we are supposed to ensure that both the women and the men are involved in decision making, so that the decisions that we make are actually not going to oppress any of the two. Okay, so we see that measures and strategies geared towards a balanced gender ratio must be taken at all levels of decision making. We also see that this is also important when appointing working groups, project teams, commissions, and advisory boards, as well as when organizing events. Okay, so in whichever activity that you're implementing in your project, should ensure that there is a representation of both men and women. Okay, so if you're choosing leaders, if you're probably making discussion groups or working groups, you're supposed to ensure that there is a balance in men and women, so that all their decisions or all their contributions are actually taken care of. Then the other principle is equal treatment in integrated. The other principle is equal treatment is integrated into steering processes. Here we see that steering instruments include quality management and gender budgeting. And we see that all targets related to people are defined in terms of full equality, and the targets attained are therefore presented by gender. So controlling routine includes gender-specific evaluation of results and a systematic steering of the gender ratio. In other words, the development and implementation of targets, strategies, and genders. Okay, so whenever we are steering processes or ensuring that processes are taking place or processes go on well, there should be equal treatment of both men and women. So when we are budgeting, we should ensure that both activities of men and women are taken care of. And even when we are evaluating, we need to ensure that both men and women are actually benefiting or are equally benefiting from the project activities. So what is the effect of gender mainstreaming? When there is gender mainstreaming, we see that households become more secure in terms of food requirements. So the households are able to secure foodstuff. Then we see that households are able to save slightly more. If you look at the picture below, you're able to see that actually when both women and men are involved in income generating activities, there's actually slightly more income than when it's only men involved in productive activities which bring income. Then we also see that the quality of houses in terms of type or roofing material, type of walls, generally there is better life or lifestyle for those that are having gender mainstreaming in their activities or in their families. So now let's look at gender analysis. We see that gender analysis is a systematic analytical process based on sex disaggregated and gender information, or we can define it as a systematic gathering and examination of information on gender differences and social relations in order to identify, understand, and redress inequalities based on gender. We see that gender analysis examines the differences in the roles and norms of women and men, girls and boys, and the different levels of power they hold, their differing needs, constraints, and opportunities, and the impact of these differences in their lives. Okay. So what are the resources for effective gender analysis? Number one is specialized expertise in gender issues. Then the other resource is access to national gender statistics and research. Then finally, access to qualitative data generated through policy and academic research. So all these resources are required for you to do proper gender analysis. So when do we use gender analysis? One, we can use gender analysis during the initial design of a project. We can also use it before the implementation of a given policy. We can also use it during midterm review and evaluation of a project or policy. Okay, so when we are designing, when we are implementing, and even when we are evaluating the implementation process. So at all these levels we can use gender analysis to see how the men and women are actually benefiting, or the constraints they are facing, so that we are able to ensure that there is equality for all. So we see that overall we use gender analysis when we need to develop a comprehensive situation analysis or increase our understanding of gender issues and challenges in the countries we work in or in the communities where we work. So thank you so much for listening, and in case you have any questions, kindly send them to my email address so that we can discuss them in our next virtual class.